They told me to open the gate for the greater good. But when I laid out the original map in the middle of the meeting, the whole room went silent. Like the video, subscribe to the channel because you're about to witness how one ordinary man stopped an entire machine with nothing but the truth. We demand that you open this gate immediately. This is a public access path approved by community consensus. Karen's sharp voice sliced through the sunny morning air. Louder than the wind coming off the lake, I stood across from her, separated by a nearly 2-meter-tall iron fence. The gate was locked. A sign hung at eye level. Private property, no trespassing. Next to her were 2 HOA security guards, one holding a clipboard, the other recording everything on a phone. I didn't answer right away. I calmly slipped a hand into my pocket, pulled out a copy of my land deed and held it up. This isn't a public path. It's mine, and you just stepped past a no trespassing sign. Karen didn't blink. She pointed to the narrow dirt trail running through the brush straight down to the water. Then I request you prove that to the HOA legal team, because if not, we'll petition the city to seize this land for public benefit. I smiled faintly. You're welcome to try. This wasn't the first time Karen had said something like that, and I was sure it wouldn't be the last. It all started 2 months ago, when I received a surprisingly elegant invitation, a thick card in a lavender-scented envelope. At the center, printed in ornate script, an invitation to collaborate. Evergreen Hills Board of Trustees, Lakeside Beautification Project. Scrawled at the bottom was Karen's signature and her personal phone number. I was surprised the lakeside lot, a triangle-shaped patch tucked away at the southern edge of the neighborhood, had rarely been mentioned. Small, overgrown, and sloping down to the lake, it was entirely cut off from the main roads. But what made it special was this. It was the only natural path to the lake from the residential area. All other access points were blocked by city land or fully developed private homes. I called her back. Karen's tone was honey-sweet. We think your lot has potential as a community access trail to the lake. Of course, we're not forcing a sale, we'd just like to negotiate. You'd retain title, we'd clean it up. Lay stone paths, add solar lights, maybe even install a plaque with your name honoring your contribution. I cut her off. I'm not selling. I'm not donating. That land has belonged to my family since 1982. My father used to fish there every afternoon. Karen chuckled softly, but I could hear the disappointment behind it. That's a shame. But you understand, if there's a public development goal, the city sometimes has to explore alternate solutions. Hung up. A week later, I received my first warning letter. Overgrowth exceeds visual standards. Potential aesthetic disruption. I laughed. That patch of land had sat wild for decades, weeds waist high. No one had cared. Now suddenly it disrupted the view. I hired someone to clear the overgrowth, but I left the tall reeds by the lake's edge untouched because my father once told me those reeds are a natural wind barrier. 2 days later, I got another citation. Unauthorized material accumulation, referring to a pile of stones I had stacked to make a small sitting step. Then came the third letter. Continued non-cooperation may result in city petition to rezone property for public access. That's when I started digging. I went to the city planning office and requested all development proposals under review. I wasn't surprised. There it was, a proposal to open a lakeside retreat area with entry point from the southwest. There's only one route that fits that description, a path running straight through my land. I printed the map and circled the path. My chest tightened. They didn't care about beautifying anything. They needed an entrance, and I was the door they couldn't open. After uncovering the proposal to build a lakeside resort, one thing became absolutely clear. Everything was being staged to pressure me into surrendering the land. It wasn't speculation anymore. Every action from the HOA, from friendly invitations to warning letters, was just another chess move in a strategy already drawn up. And my land. The last piece on the board, I started printing out every zoning map of Evergreen Hills from the past 15 years. One in particular caught my attention, a pathway diagram the HOA submitted 6 months ago. It left my name off entirely. No boundaries in the path to the lake. It ran straight through what they now labeled unclaimed buffer zone, a legal fiction, a polite erasure of my existence. I didn't wait. I called my family's attorney, Mr. Samuel Wu, the one who'd handled my father's estate. Within 24 hours, he sent me a complete folder of documentation, original land deeds, certified maps from 1982, and most importantly, A legal document stamped in bold. No access route to the southwest. Lakeside shall be opened without written consent from the adjoining landowner. That adjoining landowner was me. I made copies of everything, sent them via registered mail to the HOA office, and emailed scanned versions to the city planning department, along with a formal objection to any zoning activity that would affect my legally held property. 3 days passed. No reply from the HOA, but they responded in a different way. On Tuesday afternoon, I pulled into my driveway and saw a group gathered near my fence. Construction vests, measuring tape, surveying flags, a handheld ground scanner. A truck parked nearby bore a generic logo, Everrange Development. I hadn't even stepped out of the car when a woman in a gray blazer walked up. "Karen, Mr. Ethan," she said, voice still sugar-coated, but her eyes worn out from too many losses. "We're conducting a preliminary topographic scan for a future community utility site. It's just an early assessment, no impact to your property." I folded my arms. "The land you're standing on is fully covered by my deed. You have no right to step on it, let alone scan it." Karen's jaw tightened. "We have municipal rights to observe transitional space when tied to a community development objective. City approval is forthcoming." I smiled and pulled out my phone. "Then you won't mind if I document this unauthorized survey for the Land Management Office and Municipal Enforcement?" She froze for exactly 1 second, then turned to the workers. "Stop, we're done here." They packed up and left. I didn't say another word, but the moment they drove off, I installed 24/7 surveillance cameras on all 3 corners of the fence. That evening, I sent a formal notice to every adjacent homeowner. Any unauthorized entry into Parcel 14B will be subject to criminal prosecution under state trespassing laws. And just like someone had flipped a switch, the very next morning, I received a notice from the HOA. An emergency meeting had been called. Agenda: discussion of management options for the abandoned lakeside parcel and its obstruction of planned community projects. For the first time in years, I decided to attend an HOA meeting. Not to argue, not to protest, but to walk in, pull out the original map, and lay it on the table right in front of everyone. Thursday evening, I walked into the Evergreen Hills Community Hall at 6:55 p.m. sharp, 5 minutes before the emergency HOA meeting was set to begin. The room was nearly full. Most of the faces were neighbors I'd only nodded at while walking past their houses. Now they looked at me like they weren't sure what I was: a complainant, an obstacle, or a troublemaker. As I sat in the middle row carrying a black leather document case, the only thing I still owned intact from my father. Karen sat at the center of the board's table, flanked by 2 familiar HOA board members and 1 unfamiliar man in a suit briefcase, tight smile. "Must be the lawyer." At exactly 7 p.m., Karen tapped a plastic gavel on the table. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to address the situation regarding the Southwest Lakeside parcel, which remains neglected and poses safety concerns as well as delays progress on a pending community utility project." I scanned the room. Some nodded, others leaned in to whisper to each other. Karen continued, her tone sharpening. "We believe this land may have been zoned as a secondary access route as early as 2005. Ownership records are unclear due to inconsistencies in archived filings. We are seeking resident input on whether to petition the city to open an official entry path through the parcel." I stood up. "Excuse me, may I speak?" Karen hesitated, caught off guard. "Mr. Ethan, HOA rules don't allow comments from non-board members." One of the board members leaned in and whispered in her ear. She paused, "Unless the speaker is a directly involved landowner." She turned to me, eyes narrowed. "Do you have documentation proving that?" I smiled. "I do. And more." I walked calmly to the front table, opened the case, pulled out a folded map. This is the original zoning map from 1982 issued by the County Land Office. It confirms Parcel 14B belongs to my family. It includes the path you're now referring to as a potential public access route. I laid the map flat, and this is a clause officially certified by the planning office. No road modification or access through the Southwest Lakeside parcel may proceed without written consent from the adjacent landowner. Karen frowned. "We've never received any such document." "Because I sent it 3 days ago," I cut in. "To this board, to the city planning office, and to the county legal department." I placed copies of my formal objection on the table. Also included a delivery receipt from my attorney. I've installed 24-hour surveillance on the entire property. Any unauthorized entry will be considered criminal trespass. Karen raised her eyebrows. Are you threatening this board? I looked her directly in the eye. I'm protecting a property title recognized by state law. The room was heavy with silence. An older man in the back row raised his hand. So, the land really is yours? I nodded, fully documented, and I'm ready to defend it in court if necessary. Then a younger woman, someone I'd seen walking her dog by the lake, spoke up. Then why was the HOA planning to open a trail there? Did anyone even ask permission? Karen stood abruptly, mouth opening, but before she could speak, the lawyer beside her gently tugged her sleeve and whispered something. Her face turned pale. I returned to my seat, not triumphant, just cold inside because I knew. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the opening move. I thought things would quiet down after that meeting. I thought that laying out the maps, presenting the documents, and standing before the whole community to say this land is mine, it is legally protected, any trespass will be met with consequences, would have been enough, but I forgot one thing. This was Evergreen Hills, and Karen doesn't back down. Just 3 days after the meeting, I started noticing something. Off, the mail carrier began delivering my letters a day late. The garbage truck skipped my house twice. Then one afternoon, I came home to find a laminated sheet stuck to my front door. Notice this resident is currently not in compliance with the community development plan approved by consensus. No signature, no stamp, but the font identical to every official HOA memo I'd ever received. I tore it down and called the HOA office. No one answered. I sent an email. Auto reply, this inbox is under maintenance. That evening on the neighborhood online forum, a post appeared. Should one resident be allowed to block progress for the entire community? The cover photo, a wide-angle shot of my backyard grill with a big red arrow pointing to the lake trail, and a caption that read, where a lakeside promenade could have been for all our families. I read every comment. Half supported the HOA, calling for a small sacrifice for the greater good. The other half were lukewarm. Things like, well, if he really owns the land, maybe he could at least share a portion. Almost no one defended me, and I understood why they didn't know my story. To them, I was just that guy who refuses to cooperate. That night I made tea and played an old radio interview of my father from the time he was asked to speak on a local station. His voice was calm, thoughtful. I don't keep the land to sell it. I keep it so my child knows some things can't be measured in price, only in roots. I took a sip of tea and started making plans. The next morning, I contacted a local journalism group known for covering HOA conflicts, specifically Lana Dorsey, a reporter well known for exposing abuse disguised as community development. I sent her everything: the original zoning maps, the land deeds, photos of the disputed path, the warning notices, and screenshots of the HOA forum post. She called me within 3 hours. You just hit the core of what I've been chasing for 6 months. HOAs pretending to act for the public good, while quietly coercing landowners out of key parcels. If you're open to it, I'd like to make a short feature. I said yes, but I had something else to do first. I walked down to the lakeside plot, the one Karen had once offered to pave light and dedicate in my honor if I'd only cooperate. I dug 3 holes and planted 3 thick wooden stakes nearly 2 meters tall. On each stake, I mounted a metal sign: private property protected by law. No trespassing. Next to it, a QR code linking to a new website I'd launched the night before. The site contained everything: maps, legal scans, photographs, a timeline of events. And now the full story told my way. If they wanted to fight this with public opinion, I'd answer with facts, and this time I wouldn't wait for them to move. I'd go first. 3 days after I posted the warning signs and made all legal records public on my own website, Lana Dorsey's expose went live. Headline front and center on the local news platform: pathway denied when one resident blocked a whole HOA's ambition. Within 12 hours, it racked up over 80,000 views shared across dozens of community groups, not just in Evergreen Hills. People from nearby neighborhoods, even other states, started commenting, sharing their own stories. They tried to force me to sell my backyard to make room for a parking lot. My husband was threatened with legal action for planting flowers in the wrong color. Turns out they wanted our lot next to the park. This isn't rare. It's a playbook. That evening, Lana called again, her voice electric. I'm expanding this into a 3-part investigative series. It looks like HOAs everywhere are using the same formula: bureaucratic pressure, plus internal media control, community will, equals legally sanitized land grabs. And you're the first one to fight back with the law. I didn't smile. In fact, I felt a chill because I knew what that meant. They wouldn't sit quietly and let me become a symbol, and I was right. The next day, a package arrived, no return address, but stamped with the official HOA logo. Inside, a file marked as a land acquisition proposal bearing the seal of the County Urban Development Council, and attached a compensation agreement offering to buy the land at a so-called generous rate, along with a handwritten note. We still hope this can be resolved peacefully. Let's not let a small issue damage the reputation of our entire community. I forwarded it all to Samuel, my attorney. He replied with just 3 words, "Leave it to me." An hour later, he sent a formal response copied to the city legal counsel. It read, "The acquisition proposal was invalid due to lack of resident approval. Misrepresenting private property as public asset constituted a serious legal violation. A formal request was submitted to open an internal investigation into the HOA board for abuse of authority. I uploaded the full letter to my website with a note. If they want to bring in the law, I'll lay the map out for everyone to see. But there's one thing I haven't told anyone yet, not even Lana." Last week, while reviewing property transfer records and capital filings, I stumbled across a buried document, a quiet little file not publicly posted. It was a capital contribution agreement from EverRange Development, the same company behind the Lakeside Resort Plan. The receiving party, an unnamed private investor listed as a silent partner, and the legal representative, Karen L. Howard. I don't have hard proof, not yet. But if I were to give this thread to the press, to investigators, or simply let the residents connect the dots for themselves, I stared at the contract hand resting on the screen. My pulse thudded. Karen had picked the wrong path. The news spread faster than I expected. 2 days after Lana's article dropped, the HOA held another emergency meeting. This time, no email invitation came my way. Didn't matter. I didn't need to sit inside the room to know what was going on. I just stood outside and watched people's faces as they walked out. And I saw it. A young mother came out first. I remembered her comment under the HOA's earlier post calling me selfish for blocking the lake path. But this time, when she saw me standing near the steps, she slowed down, gave a small nod, and said quietly, "I'm sorry, I didn't know they were hiding that much." Next came Rick, a former HOA board member, famous for his obsession with lawn height enforcement. 4 inches, not 5. He didn't say a word, just exhaled hard through his nose, looked at me long and steady, then walked away. But his eyes, they no longer held that familiar disdain. 3 hours later, I got an email from an anonymous @maildropcc address. Subject line, "You should have this," from someone who used to believe Karen attached was a scan of a private HOA meeting transcript from 6 months ago. In it, Karen presented a diagram of the so-called public access trail, the very one slicing through my land. But the real purpose, not a community lake path, it was labeled as the technical entry route for the Lakeview Villas project. I read it 3 times. One line was highlighted in yellow. "If resident at 14B refuses to cooperate, initiate community pressure via internal communications." Community pressure, internal communications. As if I were just a variable to be managed, an obstacle to eliminate, I forwarded the file to Lana. Less than 12 hours later, Part 2 of her expose aired public pressure as a weapon when HOAs use neighbors to claim land. This wasn't just my story anymore. Lana interviewed 3 other residents. Each had received veiled threats from Karen. "Support the resort or your HOA benefits might be reviewed. Stand in the way and your home might be re-inspected for compliance." One elderly man described being subjected to 3 home inspections in 2 weeks after signing a petition against the path. A spotlight was finally shining into the dark corners. The community began to react. The internal forum exploded. Someone posted a photo of Karen at a private party standing next to the CEO of EverRange Development 3 years ago. Caption, "Just a coincidence." Residents who had stayed silent began sharing Lana's article, commenting, asking real questions. Do we really need this path, or is this just cover for someone to cash in? I'm not okay with land being taken under any name. Maybe he's not fighting the community. Maybe he's protecting it. Then came the text message from an unknown number. "I voted to support the path. Now I want to take it back if you need an internal witness." "I'm in." I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly. Things were moving. The HOA thought they were the ones laying down the road, but I was the one guarding the gate. The next HOA meeting wasn't held in the community hall. They moved it to a closed-door room in the neighborhood's administrative office and stopped sending public invitations. but the news still got out. One board member, silent for years, posted publicly on the resident forum, "I can't sit there and pretend anymore. I'm stepping down from the Evergreen Hills HOA board and I'll cooperate with any investigation launched by the city." Enough is enough. The post was shared over 200 times overnight, but the most important part wasn't the post. It was a comment beneath it. Brian Chen, a former structural engineer, wrote, "Karen once asked me to draft a fake diagram to prove the lakeside trail was a natural path. I still have the original sketches. If needed, I'll submit them." I arranged to meet Brian the next morning at a small cafe. He was short, soft-spoken, but deliberate. At the table, he rolled out 2 maps. One reel showing the dirt trail slicing across my land was nothing more than an abandoned footpath from the 1970s, disconnected from any formal infrastructure. The other edited the trail was extended cleanly, tied directly into the mock-up for the Lakeview Villas resort. Brian looked at me and said quietly, "I didn't think they'd actually submit it as part of the permitting documents." I held the copy. It felt less like paper and more like a weapon. I knew I couldn't keep it to myself. That night I sent an email to the city planning department, the local civil justice office, and attached every piece of evidence I had. The original and doctored maps, the internal HOA meeting, notes about applying community pressure, the capital investment contract linking Everrange Development to a legal representative named Karen L. Howard. In the description I wrote, "I don't oppose development, but development can't happen by trampling the rights of a private citizen, then legitimizing that abuse in the name of community good. This is no longer about an HOA. It's a question who truly gets to redraw the maps we live by." 2 days later, I received a call from the Regional Planning Investigation Bureau. They requested physical copies of the documents and formally opened an investigation into potential abuses of authority in the zoning process, evidence tampering, and violation of private property protections. That same day, Karen resigned. Her email was just one line: "I am stepping down from the position of HOA president for personal reasons. Interim operations will be handled by Mr. Gerald Pham." No apology, no explanation, not a single word acknowledging what had happened. But I knew, and the entire neighborhood knew too. That night on the official resident forum, Lana published her final installment, Holding Land and Holding the Line. When one citizen stops a machine disguised as community development. The cover photo, me arms crossed, standing behind my fence, the private property sign sharp and clear in the frame. And beneath the post, a new icon appeared for the first time, the gatekeeper. A week after Karen's resignation, I was invited to meet in person with the Regional Zoning Investigation Bureau. They wanted to verify every piece of evidence I had submitted, especially the falsified site plans tied to the Lakeview Villas project and the testimony of Brian Chen. I brought my father's old leather document case unfolded. Every map, every certificate, every email printout, every photo. The investigator, Mr. Martinez, a man who looked like he'd seen hundreds of cases just like mine, listened silently for nearly 2 hours. At the end, he said, "I've seen people hold land to flip it for profit. I've seen people hang on to property out of pure spite. But this is the first time I've seen someone hold land just to stop someone else from lying." I didn't know whether to thank him or laugh, so I just nodded. I don't want to win by going viral. I just don't want to lose by staying silent. 3 days later, the city issued an order. All zoning and development procedures related to the resort project were suspended. Everrange Development was instructed to resubmit its original source documents. At the same time, Karen's personal case was escalated to the state level for potential violations involving HOA leadership abuse and undeclared conflicts of interest. Within a week, the headlines exploded. HOA president resigns amid land scandal. Local resident halts $1 million development. When the last neighbor said no, I read those headlines on my phone while sitting by the lake where my father once fished. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt quiet still, until Lana messaged me, "You flipped the board, but if you don't want someone else to write the next rules, you need to write them yourself." That line stayed in my head for 3 days. I looked out at the land again. The old dirt path still lay untouched, no resort, no LED lights along the shore, but also nothing to replace it. And that's when I decided I wouldn't keep the path for myself, but I wouldn't hand it over to someone who didn't deserve it. I contacted my attorney, Samuel, and began the process of reclassifying Parcel 14B as a micro-ecological corridor conservation zone, a type of protected land still under private ownership, but with conditional communal access. Residents of Evergreen Hills would be free to walk the trail if they signed a simple pledge. Respect nature, leave no trace. Use it for no commercial purpose. I didn't build a fence. I replanted the tall reeds my father once cared for. I hammered in wooden stakes to gently guide the path. No stonework, no pavement, and I carved a wooden sign by hand, a path for those who protect. In the first week, only a few people came. A boy walking his dog, an elderly woman taking slow steps with a cane, then a family of 3 generations who sat by the lake, ate sandwiches, and left a folded note inside the wooden box I'd placed at the trailhead. Thank you for preserving this space the right way. I read it, and I knew I wasn't guarding the land anymore. I was preserving a chance for a neighborhood to remember how to live alongside each other again. Not through imposed rules, but through chosen respect. I thought everything would end after the land was officially designated an ecological corridor. I thought that after Karen stepped down, the HOA fell apart, the public sided. With the truth, the city intervened. I'd be able to return to where I started, just a regular resident keeping the piece of land. My father left me, sipping tea by the lake every now and then. But life, of course, isn't that simple. A few weeks later, Mr. Gerald Pham, the man temporarily leading the HOA, called me. His voice was cautious, Ethan. I know things between you and Karen weren't exactly friendly, but the board right now, it's chaos. Everyone's either resigned or too afraid to step up. And a lot of residents are putting your name forward for the next board election? I foresaw, I've never wanted to be part of the HOA. He let out a half laugh. I know, but you're the only one people trust not to sell them out. I said nothing. My mind filled with memories, warning letters, cold stares, the laminated community violation sign on my door. And then another image, that narrow dirt trail. Now a place where people could walk without fear of citations, without nodding to Karen like serfs, without trimming their grass to perfection. I won't be HOA president, but I'll attend the meetings as an observer. And if possible, I'd like to present a proposal. 3 days later, I stepped into the community hall in a different role, not as the opposition, but as someone people came to hear. I didn't carry a complaint. Not a lawsuit. Just the first draft of a new model I hoped would replace the current HOA. I called it Evergreen Community Volunteers Council, ECV. I spoke slowly, one clause at a time. No mandatory fees, no enforcement through fines, no penalties for personal aesthetics. Instead, a volunteer design advisory group. Any community project must pass an open vote with at least 70% participation. A rotating independent oversight committee of 5 residents, changing quarterly, to ensure transparency. And then I ended with this. We don't need an HOA to remind us to be good people. We just need space to remind ourselves that our neighbors are human beings, not subjects of surveillance. The room fell silent. Then one person clapped, then another. And slowly the entire hall. For the first time in many months, I didn't feel like the applause was for me, it was for the idea. And maybe for the first time, Evergreen Hills had a chance to be more than just beautiful on the outside, but kind on the inside. When I stepped outside, it was already dark. In the distance, the lakeside trail stretched out quietly like a witness. I knew I had just stepped into a new kind of fight, but this time I wasn't stepping in to block anyone. I was stepping in to open a way for others to protect something truly worth keeping. The first week of the Evergreen Community Volunteers Council, or ECV, was quiet. No fines, no yard inspections, no aesthetic violation, notices taped to doors. Strangely enough, no one complained about that. But by the second week, the first challenge arrived. One afternoon, I got a message from Mrs. Eliza, an older woman who lived on the eastern corner, known for being particular but never one to cause trouble. The message was short. Ethan, I hate to bother you, but the house across from me just painted their walls neon green, and they've got flashing LED lights all night. I went to check. She wasn't exaggerating. House 12B looked like a karaoke bar. The front wall was bright neon. LED lights blinked continuously. The fence had graffiti flaming dragons, no less. The homeowners, a young couple who just moved from the city, were clearly proud of it. We wanted to bring urban art to the suburbs, they said, smiling. The bolder, the better it shows personality. I stood between two worlds. On one side, tradition, peace and unspoken rules. On the other, expression, disruption, and the right to be different. Back in the old days, Karen would have just sent a violation letter followed by fines, then pressure to repaint. But now, no one had the right to force anything, And no one was quite brave enough to talk openly either. So that night I held an open meeting, not to settle disputes, but to start a conversation. The room was quiet at first. Mrs. Eliza spoke first, her voice trembling slightly. I don't hate creativity, but I'm old. I need sleep. That light flashes into my window all night long. The young woman from 12B responded, face a little flushed. We just thought, it's a new era. Why does everything always have to be beige walls and white doors? I nodded. And that's exactly why we made a change, so no one would be forced to conform, but also so no one would feel unsafe or unseen in their own home. Then I proposed a new principle, freedom within peace. Everyone could do things their way as long as it didn't negatively impact others. No rules, no fines. But if 3 separate households submitted formal concerns, a dialogue would be required. If no compromise could be reached, the ECV would step in with a design mediation plan to find harmony. The young couple agreed to install blackout curtains and switch the LEDs to motion sensors. Mrs. Eliza brought them a basket of muffins and suggested a softer shade of green, still bold, but less headache-inducing. The meeting ended with a shy hug between 2 generations and a quiet round of applause. But I knew this was just the first bump. What happens when someone wants to build a greenhouse, raise chickens, start a yoga studio out of their living room? Freedom without guidance becomes chaos, but law without compassion becomes Karen. I wrote all of it down in my notebook and found myself asking, am I building a model or just delaying a bigger fight? Enter that evening and walked down to the lake. The dirt trail was still peaceful. The same boy who once walked his dog was now sitting with a sketch pad. I approached. What are you drawing? He held up the paper. It was a small flame resting gently between 2 open hands, and under it, in messy letters, keep the fire. Don't start a fire, I laughed. That's it, isn't it? No one holds on to land forever, but learning how to keep the flame without burning the people around you. That's the real challenge. It happened on a rainy night while I was sitting at home editing the 3rd draft of the Evergreen Harmonious Community Guidelines for ECV. Alan, the young engineer who'd helped build our online zoning maps, called me, his voice breathless. Ethan, something's wrong. The western section behind your read line, it's being excavated. There's a backhoe, construction lights, people in suits, and a project sign. I grabbed my coat and ran out the door. Rain poured down in sheets. The ground was slick, but I sprinted down the familiar path, the one where I'd once posted the sign, Protected Ecological Corridor. When I arrived, I couldn't believe what I saw. A backhoe had already torn through the lake's edge, ripping up the roots of the tall reeds, leaving black exposed earth in its wake. A small crew stood nearby. None of them were from Evergreen Hills. One man, holding a large umbrella, gave sharp directions in a steady voice. This is an approved access corridor, authorized under the most recent city plan. We have emergency orders from the Department of Infrastructure. I stepped directly into the group. This is protected land. You're trespassing. No construction is permitted here. The man looked at me calmly, then pulled out a waterproof document sleeve from under his raincoat. This parcel was reclassified from private to auxiliary public utility access under signed approval by the previous co-owner. I froze. Previous co-owner. He turned to the last page of the document. There it was, in cold capital letters, temporary co-ownership transfer. Parcel 14B West, 15% of Ecological Corridor, signed Karen L. Howard. November last year, Karen. Before she stepped down, she had quietly sliced off a narrow section of the western strip and transferred it to a third party under the guise of community-serving infrastructure. The city, unaware of the history, had approved the project because the paperwork checked out. I clenched my fists. The rain was no longer the coldest thing I felt. Alan arrived, his face pale. We have to stop this. Call the press. Call environmental enforcement. I'll get drone footage from earlier tonight. I nodded. And send the original land file, the one with full coordinates. That strip was never authorized for subdivision. Not by me. That very night, I filed an emergency injunction with the Department of Resource Conservation and the City Real Estate Oversight Commission. I also activated the ECV public alert system. Protected ecological land is under unlawful disturbance. Parcel 14B West was never legally transferred. All construction activity will be treated as damage to a conservation zone. By morning, over 60 residents had gathered at the site. They formed a human fence, stood silently in the rain. No shouting, no aggression. One person held a sign, "Don't pave shortcuts over our trust." Another held hands with others, forming a circle around the torn soil. The media arrived, live news coverage began, and when Mr. Gerald Pham, the interim head of ECV, stepped in front of the cameras, he said just one thing: "We are not opposing the city. We are simply asking, did anyone actually read the maps before they signed the orders?" Construction was temporarily halted, pending a review of land boundaries. But I knew this was the true stress test. No longer a conflict between one homeowner and an HOA. Now it was a question of survival. Can a self-governing community stand firm when systems of bureaucracy and loopholes push back? I looked at the uprooted reeds. The land I thought was safe still had a fault line, and some people still knew how to slip through it. 3 days after the lakeside night dig, the site was roped off with caution tape and a new sign appeared. Ownership dispute zone. Do not enter until legal confirmation by city authority. I stood there staring at the new sign hung exactly where I once placed my own, a path for those who protect. It had been removed, tossed aside, caked in mud. Alan showed up beside me, silent. He handed me a USB drive. It's all here: drone footage, boundary surveys, maps from all 3 zoning eras. We have enough evidence to countersue. But if you go through with it, there's no turning back. I held the drive and sat on the stone steps by the lake. And I thought for a long time I once believed defeating the HOA would be enough. But it turns out when the HOA falls, the system behind it becomes painfully clear. The rubber-stamped approvals, the indifferent signatures, the plans labeled procedural only, the legal loopholes Karen had exploited before walking away without so much as a word. That night I held an emergency gathering, not in the hall in the contested land, under a sky full of stars beside crooked survey, stakes and leaning reeds trampled by machinery. Some sat on wooden stools. Others stood. A few simply sat on the earth itself. I stood at the center of the circle, projector in hand, casting old maps onto a stretched canvas sheet. From 1982 to now, they say this land has uncertain ownership. I ask you, who has walked here, planted here, lit candles, scattered their father's ashes, held a dog's leash around this lake's edge? No one replied, but I saw their eyes shimmer in the dark. I continued. Tonight, I'm not asking for resistance. I'm asking for signatures, collectively through the Evergreen Community, Volunteers Council, ECV. We will submit a counter petition. We demand a full review of the approval process. And we will file for designation of this space as a community-maintained cultural conservation zone. No one owns this land, I said, because we belong to it. And tonight we choose to stand with memory, not with blueprints. Alan passed out the signature sheets. One by one they stepped forward, some with shaking hands, some with tears, but they signed, all 117 of them, including the ones who had once stayed silent, called me selfish, thought I was just the guy guarding land. 3 days later, I submitted the petition to the Department of Justice and the City Council. Within 2 weeks, a public hearing was scheduled. I stood there as community representative, no longer just a private complainant. Across the table, the attorney for the development firm, the infrastructure department rep, and the zoning official who'd approved the land reclassification. I presented everything: the original property maps, the nighttime video footage, eyewitness testimony, the community signature roll, photos from before and after the unauthorized digging. And I ended with this: urban planning cannot be used to erase memory, and the law cannot be a tool to erase trust. The room fell silent. The ruling hasn't come yet, but this time I'm not standing alone. We waited. Each passing day felt like a slow nod, tense, quiet, and uncertain. No one knew exactly when the city would release its ruling on the disputed strip of land. The legal office said next week, then still reviewing supporting documentation. And the residents, they kept walking past the land as usual, quietly without touching anything. But then on a Friday morning, the email arrived from the City Council. Subject authorization ruling, parcel 14B, West content. After full review of all submitted records, comparison of historical maps, collected evidence, and field assessment, we affirm that the disputed area falls under original private ownership and is not eligible for reclassification as public utility land without explicit written consent from the property holder. All construction activity is to cease permanently. In addition, the council recommends that the area be considered for designation as a community cultural landmark under shared management between local authorities and representatives of the Evergreen Hills residential body. I read each line slowly, then closed the laptop. No cheering, no shouting, just stillness. That evening, I sat alone by the lake. The patch of reeds that had once been uprooted by heavy machinery had already been replanted by Mrs. Eliza herself. Yes, the very woman who once called me that stubborn land hoarder. Next to it, a new wooden bench repaired by the same group of teenagers who once painted dragons on their fence, on the back of the bench carved in brass tacks, where we relearned how to live beside each other. I heard footsteps behind me. Alan arrived, then Lana, then Gerald, then Mina, the girl who drew the flame, then others. No announcement, no invitation. But we all knew today was the end, the kind no one ever bothers to define. There was no ceremony, no speeches, just a long wooden table placed in the middle of the land, and on it a blank book. I wrote the first line: "We didn't keep this land to win. We kept it so no one else would have to lose to silence again." Then we passed the book around. Everyone wrote something. Some just signed, some wrote poems, some taped in old family photos from weekends at the lake. Some wrote in Vietnamese, some in Spanish, some in Tagalog. Everyone, that was the evergreen memory book. It would never be scanned, never posted, never sent to the press. Only those who had walked the narrow path could ever understand it. As night fell, I stood at the center of our quiet circle. We kept the land, but what matters more is that we kept each other. No one spoke, but everyone understood. Because from this day on, that land would no longer be marked on any administrative map. It would be known only by word of mouth, the kept path. A month after the kept path was officially recognized as a community cultural site, Evergreen Hills entered a phase I call the season of quiet rebirth. No ribbon cuttings, no speeches, no ceremonies. But every morning something had changed. One Wednesday, a group of local high school students installed a new wooden sign at the trail's entrance. Small, simple, but beautifully painted Evergreen Cultural Commons. "Let's keep the path together," below. That was a QR code linking to a code of conduct the students had written themselves. "Tread softly, speak honestly, leave nothing but memories. No photos of strangers without asking. First, pick up one piece of trash, gain 1 minute of peace." I read it and laughed. I'd never written anything that poetic. But the moment I truly knew it was time to step back came when Mina, the girl who once drew the flame between two hands, called me to the park. She held up a printed page proposal to establish the Pathkeeping Circle, 5 rotating members changing every 3 months, elected by residents under the age of 30. I grinned. Why under 30? She didn't pause because grown-ups tend to guard power. We just want to guard the path. I was silent for a long time. The next day, I sent a handwritten letter to the interim ECV board where I'd been serving as lead coordinator since the beginning. In it, I wrote, "I am officially stepping down as lead. I'm not giving up. I'm simply stepping aside so that new voices may step forward." I nominated Mina as a youth observer and proposed a new pilot initiative for the city's agenda, youth-led community governance models. Gerald signed it immediately. Alan celebrated like he'd won the lottery. That night, I walked down to the lake alone. There was no moon, but the water still glowed, lit by a soft lantern the students had hung from the old pear tree by the shore. For the first time, I brought no documents, no notebook, just a cup of tea and an old journal, my father's. The last page was unfinished, his handwriting slanted. "If land is where we plant, then memory is where we..." He never finished the line, so I did with pencil light. The fire, I closed my eyes, listening to the wind. No bulldozers, no arguments, just the faint sound of footsteps on dry earth, then pausing, then turning back. Maybe someone out for a walk, maybe someone who once doubted me, maybe someone learning how to keep the path in their own way. And I understood the flame was no longer in my hands. It now lived in the hands of all those who didn't wait for permission to do what was right. I never expected that a small neighborhood like Evergreen Hills would end up in a statewide urban planning report. One afternoon, while watering my back garden, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman's voice, clear and regionless. "Hello, I'm the project lead for the California Institute for Urban Policy. We've read about your Evergreen Community Volunteers Council model, and we'd like to invite a representative to our upcoming statewide symposium on community governance." I paused for a moment. "I'm no longer the representative," she chuckled. "We know, but you don't need a title to be mentioned. The model you and your community built is now being considered the first successful non-enforcement-based residential governance prototype. In the state, I promised to forward the invitation to the Pathkeepers, the youth-led team now managing the space I once protected. But that night, as I read through the proposal draft, the Institute had emailed me. My eyes paused on a name listed under the advisory panel. Karen L. Howard. No mistake, Karen. The one who drew false maps. The one who brought me to the edge of legal ruin. The one who once said, "We'll bring the bulldozers." Now appearing in a government initiative as a strategic regional consultant for the very kind of model we had fought through an entire season of rain to defend. I just sat there stunned, but not angry, just curious. 3 days later, I decided to attend the symposium. Not as a speaker, just a quiet observer. I sat in the last row of a large hall lit with sterile white lights. Experts spoke on data, on community dynamics, on pilot zoning projects, in behavioral metrics, and then came the open panel. Karen stepped onto the stage, still polished, still composed, but her voice, it had changed, not sharp, not commanding, gentler. Slower. I once ran an HOA, and I used to believe if residents didn't comply, it was better they leave. But I was wrong. A community can't be managed by uniform house templates. It has to be held together by paths, different ones, but all leading toward the same place. I learned that from Evergreen Hills, and from someone I once saw as an obstacle. The hall fell silent. I don't know if she saw me sitting back there, but I knew, regardless, we had both changed. When the symposium ended, I quietly got up and left. No handshake, no words. I didn't need acknowledgement, and she didn't owe me any, because sometimes the only real apology a person can give is learning how not to repeat the same harm. That night, I returned to Evergreen. At the entrance to the kept path, a new sign had been hung. No fanfare, no credit. This gate is never locked, but please open it with 2 hands, one for understanding and the other for letting go. I nodded because some doors never needed keys. This year's Keepers Fire Festival was simple, exactly as it should be. No stage, no MC, no cameras, just a whiteboard standing in the grass by the lake with a line written by the neighborhood kids. There are no winners, only those who stayed. I stood at the edge of the crowd. It had been a long time since I sat in the center. No need anymore. The fire in the stone grill was lit by 2 young girls following a ritual. The students had written themselves. One hand holds the match. The other keeps the flame of the one before Alan sat beside me, handing me a cup of hot tea. They want to name the trail officially after your father. Tran Vong Kung, eh? I smiled. No need. He never needed a name on a road. He just needed soft soil somewhere to plant seeds. Alan looked at me. And you, what do you want your name to mean? I paused. Watched the kids set up a pop-up library under the old tree. Saw Mrs. Eliza slicing cake for a newly moved-in family. Saw 2 men who once shouted at each other at last year's HOA meeting, fishing together quietly. You know what I said? If someday someone asks, where did all this begin? I just want someone to answer. It started with a guy who refused to open the gate. Alan laughed. Resisting so something could be kept, and keeping it so others could walk through. I nodded, then handed him an envelope. What's this, he asked. A transfer of authority. I'm officially handing you control of all systems archives, charter website, and the community fund. Today, his eyes widened. You're stepping down. I'm stepping back, I corrected. Not stepping out, so what will you do? I smiled. Walk more. Maybe set up a little tea stall next to the stone grill. Anyone's welcome, no pressure. Just then Lana arrived, still the same camera in hand, shoulder bag swinging, but this time no microphone. Just her. She sat down next to me, pulled out a thin book. Evergreen, How a Neighborhood Learned to Breathe Again. I opened to the first page, no author name, not mine, not Karen's. No one's, just a line for anyone who has ever kept even just a little. I closed the book, looked up at the dusk blue sky. A child approached holding a matchstick. I lit the tip, bent down, and passed the flame to the first floating lantern on the lake. Behind me, dozens. Then hundreds of lanterns followed. The lake glowed like a map with no borders, no fences, no zoning lines, no enforcement, just light. And the people who knew how to hold each other through the only thing that can't be measured, rightness. Thank you for listening to this entire story, a journey of protecting the land, honoring its people, and preserving the things that truly matter. If this story meant something to you, please consider liking the video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to the channel so you won't miss the next stories to come.